alaikum, and welcome to Out of Sight, a podcast show aiming to raise awareness about disability and special needs. We're exploring areas of inclusion and accessibility within our community. I'm your host, Sarah. In this episode, we have a lovely guest, Brother Naqi Rizvi. Brother Naqi Rizvi is an engineer by qualification and a financial services professional by profession, and a sportsman by passion. He's incredibly passionate about disability inclusion. He's presently ranked third in the world in blind tennis, and he has run the London Marathon in the past. He's trying to make sports more inclusive and hopes to be in the Paralympics one day. He's also a firm believer that a positive upbringing of a child can hugely turn their life around for the best, and loves sharing his story with parents to encourage them to help their kids lead a life as close to normality as possible. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Naqi.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you today?
I'm very well and really lovely to be here
Yeah,
with everyone in spirit, I'm sure, who's watching.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here today, and I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yeah, me
inshallah.
too.
So why don't we just start off by saying that your bio is extremely impressive. You're an
you.
impressive individual. Why don't you talk us through your journey, through your diagnosis, and to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have an eye condition called congenital glaucoma, and I was born with this condition, hence the term congenital. So it's basically a genetic condition in which the optic nerve gets damaged. So that's essentially the wire that connects the eye to the brain and transmits stuff to the brain, which then interprets it, which allows the person to see. So obviously, if the nerve itself is damaged, even if you replace the eye, that won't actually do much because the actual connection and the wire itself is damaged. So when I was born with very limited sight. And I think it was fairly obvious to my parents when I was born that I had this because my eyes were very protruding. And obviously, that was not normal for a kid. So it was quite worrying for them. And there was lots of visits to the doctors and to try and see what happened because obviously I couldn't express myself just like no other kid can when they're young, unless you're Prophet
Yeah.
Isa, alayhi salam, in which case you can. So they weren't really sure what was wrong or what I could see or what I could not see, but I think they definitely knew, and there was some kind of alarm bells.
Yeah.
And then as I kind of grew older, I think they then started to see more visible signs, like if I was playing with something that felt kind of slightly far from me, I struggled to find it. On my first birthday, obviously I have no recollection of this, but my mum tells me about how I pretty much cried during the whole celebration because there was a lot of lights and stuff around. And what they didn't know at the time was I had enormous photophobia, so I just couldn't face any sort of light, and I couldn't express myself. So
Yeah.
I just kept crying pretty much the whole time. And I think all of those little bits and bobs came together to help piece for my parents what exactly was happening. And then they consulted with different doctors who kind of said, "Yep." I still think, and you know, I could be wrong. I still think it took a long time before it was confirmed that that's what my eye condition was, and it was congenital glaucoma. And it took even longer to prove that it was something genetic, because no one else in my family had ever had it.
Oh, really?
So yeah, it was the first one. So it was a bit of a shock, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
in many ways. So when I was born, it was very limited, but I could see a little bit, and gradually they kind of kept getting worse. Because the thing with glaucoma is, the reason my eyes were really protruding is because the some of the liquid in the eyes, and obviously as a medical student, you know that really well, the aqueous and the vitreous humor,
Yeah.
they kind of should be there in a certain amount to help regulate the eye pressure, but also should get drained when more of it gets produced. That drainage in some ways gets blocked. So when that kind of accumulates, that puts pressure on the eye, which obviously presses on the optic nerve. So if it's not controlled, which mine wasn't, the eyesight just keeps getting worse because obviously the optic nerve keeps getting pressed and keeps getting more damaged. So my eyesight kept getting worse. And I think towards the latter part got, deteriorated much quicker compared to the earlier parts. And by the age of 7, I went completely blind. And even after that, there was a whole lot of procedures with different doctors to try and experiment in some ways. Could a BUC or C procedure work? And unfortunately, none of them did. I think some of them just made things worse. And because of the photophobia, I found it really hard to even put eye drops and stuff because I couldn't really look up and couldn't couldn't really face the light, couldn't really open my eyes, and my eyes were incredibly sensitive. Like I couldn't have anyone even touch my face and stuff because
Wow.
that would just make my eyes water and just cause a lot of pain. And I used to be in pain pretty much 24/7 because the pressure was just so high.
Yeah.
And then kind of much later in life, I think I was 22, I developed an ulcer in my eye, and that kind of prompted one of the doctors to say, I think you need to get your eyes removed.
Mm.
And at the time, it just felt like this like serious blow to myself and my mom, and I go like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? But perhaps he could have delivered the message in a slightly better manner, but he was correct. And then we took different opinions and then ended up with the conclusion that yes, that would probably be the best thing because I couldn't see anything. I was living with pain 24/7. It's like, what's the point? And plus, there was a very, and still is a very limited possibility that there will be a cure for congenital glaucoma. So I then underwent, when I was 23, I underwent a process called enucleation in which my eyes were removed
Mm.
and the optic nerve was cut, and now I have prosthetic eyes. And obviously, what that means is because the nerve itself is cut, I have no sensation or pain in my eyes, so I don't have the same photophobia anymore, which means I can actually look up.
Alhamdulillah.
Obviously, it also means that I have no sensation, so that tends to have its own challenges in the sense of one of the issues which really impacted me, which I never realized because the doctors never mentioned it to me, was insomnia.
Mm.
Because obviously, melatonin is what helps us regulate our sleep wake up cycle to an extent.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
obviously, that is generated when there's light that enters your eyes, or like when it's evening and your eye sends a signal to the brain and say, yo, it's nighttime. I think we need to start telling the body that it's time to go to bed.
Yeah.
Now, I don't really have that because obviously I can't see if it's light or dark outside. So my brain
Mm.
doesn't know. And that then causes lots of issues where I sometimes can't sleep for hours at night because my brain probably just thinks it's not nighttime. And then sometimes in the day, if I'm tired, I'll just, start to feel really lethargic and really sleepy. So it can all sometimes be a bit of a battle to kind of work with my sleep, but it's been so many years now and I've just had to work with it. But sometimes if things start to get bad with anxiety and stuff, the insomnia just gets worse, and it's just something I have to deal with and live with. So it's
Mm.
been, yeah, a very interesting journey. Thankfully, after my enucleation, I haven't had any surgeries, so it's been a few
Alhamdulillah.
years since I've had one, but I've probably had about 13 surgeries in my life so far. Again, a lot of them I think trying to see if they could use a particular scientific technique to try and salvage whatever they could, or to see if they could improve something, but obviously none of that happened.
Yeah.
So that's kind of in a nutshell the journey and the diagnosis from a medical perspective.
Wow. That's quite interesting, I'd say. Um, quite an up and down, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So you went through pretty much all of your childhood, um, if I could say suffering, if that's the right word, through your pain
Mm.
and through your blindness. How did you train yourself um, across the age?
I think it's a really difficult one in some ways, right? Because you're always kind of adapting. And, for me, obviously, as a very small kid, I knew nothing else. So for me, it wasn't like actively trying to adapt because I didn't really know what it was like, to be able to see and then
Mm.
suddenly have to switch. For me, I think it was a gradual deterioration. But I think what did make it really hard was when I actually went to school because my mum, who was really, really keen that both my sister and I get really good education and
Hmm.
have the opportunities that any other child would. She was very keen that kind of we go to the best schools, and obviously that translated to going to a regular school beside the girls and boys.
Mm.
So up until the time I graduated, I was the only blind person in the school. And as a kid, that was really, really hard because even simple stuff like being able to see what the teacher was writing on the board wasn't possible. I couldn't
Hmm.
read and write like other students could. I couldn't play a lot of games that they could, which involved running around. And kids can be quite mischievous. They might,
Yeah.
playfully just kind of gently hit you and just run away and just
Yeah.
play games to kind of make you figure out who that was, etc.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff as a child can be really hard
Yeah.
because you obviously want to fit in, you want to do all of the things that they're able to. And even for my teachers at the time in school, it was just really hard. They just couldn't relate how someone who couldn't see could study and could absorb the information. But my mum had a lot of guidance from some inspirational people who kind of told her that no, you can, and keep pursuing this. And my mom really went to great lengths to, even learn Braille so that she could teach me that. But I don't think I was very keen to learn because none of my friends did that. And I don't want to
Yeah.
do that. But she just, tried different ways, and we started orally first and started to learn that way. But then as I started to show some sort of results, my teachers started to take a bit more interest and thought, okay, this maybe can be done.
Mm.
And as time progressed, then I found some teachers who were willing to take risks and teach me through slightly adapted techniques. And alhamdulillah, the results turned out to be really well. And it was just testament to the fact that if you all work together and can find creative ways of doing things, all of that is possible.
Yeah.
So that was from the school perspective. I think outside of life, adapting wise, it was one of those things where, again, I didn't want to be different. So I was really hesitant to use a cane to walk because I'm like,
Hmm.
I don't want to look different. Yes, I want independence, but I just want to be like my other sighted peers. So that shame in some ways prevented me from really being independent when I could be. And obviously, if I were to rewind the clock, I'd do things very differently.
Mm.
But because I always had my family and my friends around, I didn't really feel the need as well. And like in my school, I knew exactly where everything was, so I could walk without a cane fairly comfortably. It was only when I moved to university and I was by myself, and I was like, oh my god, I feel so dependent now. And my mom, when I was growing up, had kind of encouraged me so many times during summer holidays, please do some cane training so you can be a bit more independent. And then I was like, no, I don't want to do it. And
Mm.
that was the first time where I kind of went to her and I said, Mom, I really want to do it because I feel so dependent now, and I really want to be able to lead a life where, I can at least do the basic things on my own and be able to take myself around the campus, because it's not nice to depend on other people.
Yeah.
And I feel really proud of using the cane now, and I just think it's a symbol of strength rather than weakness. But obviously, as a kid, you don't always think that in that logical manner, right? Because all you care about is just about fitting in and just
Yeah.
not being ridiculed by the people in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. That's quite an inspirational story on its own. Maybe we should just talk about that on for the rest of the broadcast. Um, so you went to school. You probably
Yeah,
had a great education. You're obviously very smart because
I'm
you're
not sure
an
about that,
engineer.
but
You're an engineer by qualification. Engineering is a difficult degree. Anyone can probably know that. Um, so how did you do it at university? How did you study engineering?
right. So I'll rewind the clock a little bit and take it to school, because obviously, if you want to do engineering at university, you've got to take certain subjects at school that kind of
Yeah.
enable you to do that. And when I was faced with the opportunity at the end of my eighth grade, I knew that I wanted to do science because I absolutely loved it. I love maths as well,
Hmm.
and I was doing pretty well. But then again, right, people's preconceived notions and a lot of the sort of management and teachers and stuff said, I don't think this would be the best idea because it's going to be incredibly hard. I think you should go with something that's a bit more theory based, that might be easier for you because it's going to make your life easier. And yes, in many ways it made sense, but I can be a very stubborn person, and I know. And luckily, my parents, who've always been incredibly supportive, were like, no, do whatever you want to do in life, and we'll be with you the whole way. And they absolutely were. So I did risk it and decided to go for science. But then it was really hard to then convince the exam board to let me take my exams in a way that would suit me. So, as an
Hmm.
example, with chemistry or with maths, to have an embossed paper. So anything that you draw on it with a pen gets embossed, so I can feel it. So that's what
Mm.
helped me with equations and diagrams, because I couldn't obviously see them, so I had to find a different way of doing them, or to have a
Wow.
reader and a writer for exams. Because even though I had an assistive software in my laptop that would basically convert text into speech, that would not work for a lot of equations, for a lot of diagrams and stuff. So it was about trying to find that. So once we got over that hoop, then it was like, okay, what's the next level now? And again, I still thought I really enjoyed science and engineering. Well, science and maths, and then decided to go for engineering at university, which again was really hard because whenever I was applying, the first answer was, I don't think you're making a very wise choice. I think it's going to be really
Mm.
hard. You're not going to be able to do it. And in fact, the university I went to actually refused me first. And
Wow.
I was really adamant because I'm like, why are you refusing me when I think I can do it? And then I met with the dean. We had a nice long chat. He took a test and he said, okay, we might be able to do something about it. And then it took a week or so before they came back and said, let's trial it for 6 months and see how it works. And it was a combination of lots of different things. My teachers were really helpful because they could see how keen I was to learn, and the fact that it was just trying to teach me in a different manner. It wasn't like I was mentally not capable. It was just I couldn't see stuff. So it was just about trying to do it either through touch or through kind of just sound. And that's how we did most of the stuff. So even for one of my courses, for example, computer aided design, my professor in some ways was my screen reader and would tell me what's happening on the screen and then kind of do as I told him. And that's how we did that for a lot of laboratory experiments, because you normally do them in a team anyways, regardless of whether you have a
Yeah.
disability or not. So we
Yeah.
just divided and conquered it in a way that worked towards our strengths. So I would do more of the analysis bit, whereas one of my other friends who might be better at setting up the experiment did it that way. And it was just about trying to find ways to do it. For some of my friends who perhaps find it really hard to understand concepts that I was able to grasp fairly easily, we had a deal with one of my friends where he would read out the textbook to me, and I would explain the concepts to him, and it was just a really mutually beneficial relationship in that way. So it obviously meant I had to sometimes put a lot of extra effort. I'd sometimes spend 14 hours at university just trying to get my head around some of this stuff, because obviously if you can't see, a lot of things aren't very intuitive. Even when I did programming, for example, you do have to give a lot of extra time, but it was all worth it because I really, really loved it and enjoyed it. And the best thing for me was when I graduated at the end of that, and I didn't tell my parents because I just invited them to their graduation. But what they didn't know was that despite being the only one in my batch with a physical disability, I actually had the highest grade among all the other kids, and I was
Wow.
chosen as the valedictorian to actually give the speech, and they had no idea that was going to
Wow.
happen. And I deliberately didn't tell them anything, and because we, even when I was young, my mom often used to tell me, it is my dream to see you graduate as an engineer. And I was like, what an amazing moment for me to reflect on this and to think about the fact that something that my mom told me so many years ago has finally come true in such a spectacular manner. And it's
Yeah.
just one of the proudest memories that still sticks with me until today.
Yeah. Honestly, that just gave me goosebumps. That's amazing. That's really, really good. And mashallah to you. So, essentially, through your journey so
Yeah,
far that you've explained to us,
yeah,
what's kind of stood out to me personally is the support network. You've just carried on through the help of your mum initially, through your mum's support and through your mum's backing. You've always just persevered, even when people have kind of shut you down or people have told you, no, actually, maybe not, or this is actually really difficult for you and us. Maybe we shouldn't do it. You've just persevered and you've carried on and you've defied all odds, right? And so, what's the importance of support network throughout your journey so far?
I think anyone will tell you, right, that a support network is probably one of the most indispensable things. It is absolutely vital because you can't fight a lot of these battles, and they could be any battle, not just disability related, on your own. You do need people who believe in you, and people who just dare to listen to you when things aren't going well. Because sometimes all you need is just someone who can give you that shoulder to cry on and just say, "I'm here for you if you need me." I might not have all the answers, but I'm here. And I was really blessed, alhamdulillah, to have that. And as I said, my mom was incredibly focused on my education and stuff, but my dad provided support in a very different way. He was all about trying to live life to its max, and make me enjoy the adventures of this world. And even simple stuff like taking me and my sister to theme parks every now and then, and having some really fun time with roller coasters or playing board games every Sunday, trying different sports, including martial arts and stuff, and just making sure that we got that confidence in that way as well was hugely important. And as I said, kind of my teachers, once they started to figure out that, I was able to absorb a lot of that stuff, it just had to be done slightly differently, became a really important support network as well, who could then act as advocates for me and kind of say, actually, we just need to find different ways of this of conveying the messages to him. And then my friends later on, as I grew up, became a really, really important support network to me as well. For example, when I'd play baseball at school, my sort of PE teacher who would be pitching the ball would let me know when to swing, and then I'd hold one of my friend's hand and kind of run from base to base. And
Wow.
we're just trying to work collaboratively as a team to kind of make that work. And it worked really well. And I have to say, one of the most special persons for me in that support network, even up until now, is my sister.
Oh.
So, because we're just two siblings, and she also has an eye condition similar to mine. And I think the two of us can relate to each other in a way that perhaps no one else can. And oftentimes we don't even need to say anything to each other. It's just
Yeah.
unspoken, and it's just a heart
Oh.
connection. And she's younger than me, which means I can boss her around a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Just a little bit.
exactly. In some of those times, like I remember even kind of when I used to have my surgeries when I was growing up, and even when I had my enucleation and stuff, she was always one of those people who was always there and was always able to give a lot of comfort. She just knew what to do or what to say in the instance that would make him feel like, oh, this is brilliant. And I still remember really vividly when I had my enucleation, I was kind of semi-conscious as I came back to the room where my family was, and obviously they were all there, and I just held my sister's hand, and we didn't need to say anything at all, and it was just conveyed through that kind of holding hands together, which was really special. And
Yeah.
hopefully both of us find a lot of comfort and a lot of support from each other as well. So alhamdulillah, hugely blessed to have a really really great support network.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And I can imagine the role of the parents, like you mentioned, is so, so important in this sense because, like you said, as a child, you didn't know any better.
Exactly.
But they were the ones that kind of pushed you. And then once they pushed you, you were on your own path and your own journey and you pushed further for yourself.
Yes.
And then you had teachers that obviously supported you. And like you mentioned, your friends.
Yeah.
One thing that you spoke about was the sports. Now, maybe this is just ignorant of myself, but how do you play sports? Because you play blind tennis, don't you?
Yes.
You're ranked third in the world, which is like, wow. How do you do it?
So there's a lot of different sports which I do, and I have to say, so I've been in the UK for just over 6 years now, and I found so many amazing sporting opportunities here, which I'm hugely grateful for. But as I said, growing up, because my dad was really into his sport, he tried to inculcate some of that into me as well, and kind of make me try. So growing up, it was mainly martial arts and cricket. So at the time, cricket was with an audible ball, so I could hear it coming towards me, and then be able to track it that way. But most of my sports that I do now are done with some adaptation. So, for example, when it comes to running, I always have a guide runner who's essentially my eyes, will tell me about turns and about steps and about everything that you need to know if you're running. And we have a tether between us, so we're kind of 6 inches or so apart. And yeah, we just run side by side. When it comes to cycling, I have a tandem bike, so the person at the front, so it's basically one long bike with kind of two sets of chains. So the person at the front is the one doing the steering, and we both have pedals and chains. And trust me, the person at the back has to do a lot of hard work. Some people think at the back you can just chill. Now
You can just do the front person's
it's a
pedaling.
lot of hard work, especially on the uphills because you're pushing a lot more weight.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So that's that. With tennis, there's a few adaptations. So tennis is one of my favorite sports. I absolutely love it. So the ball has a rattle in it. So every time it bounces, you can hear it. The baseline is tactile, so you can feel it with your feet to help you orientate yourself during a rally. And then if I'm serving to you, for example, I'll be like, ready, Sarah? You say yes. I say play, and then I serve the ball because obviously you can't make eye contact, so it's all done through kind of sound. And there's lots of other sports which are kind of adapted in different ways. So I've done skiing a couple of times as well with a guide, which is around, your guide having a microphone and then kind of shouting out instructions in terms of where to turn and how much to turn, etc. Or with rock climbing, someone kind of telling you who's hopefully beeling you from the floor around where different holes are, etc. So it's just about trying to find, and sometimes one thing that may work for one person might not be the best thing for someone else, and it's just about trying to see what works for you and what gives you the opportunity to be able to be at your best.
Yeah, wow. I didn't even know these things existed, to be honest. Yeah, that's quite nice, actually. Sounds like you play a lot of sports. Is it a big
I
part of your
try. I
identity?
think that it's a huge part of what I do, and I think it's one of the things I'm really passionate about, and probably one of the things I do most outside of work, like pretty much every evening or weekend, because I feel that's what gives me not the most, but an enormous amount of satisfaction and a sense of well-being and a sense of accomplishment. Which, because like on a tennis court, you can just imagine, like, obviously I know what a tennis court, I can visualize how big it is and stuff, and I can just run around trying to get those shots back. I don't need a guide. I don't need someone to tell me what to do, and that just sense of freedom
Yeah.
is just absolutely incredible. So I love running and cycling as well, but they don't give me that same sense of accomplishment because I'm still dependent on someone else to guide me in terms of what to do. And whereas on tennis court, I don't have any any of those constraints, and I just find that feeling so liberating. So I
Yeah.
think sports does give me a lot of sense of fulfillment and accomplishment, and also in some ways mindfulness, because I do find I'm one of those people who's incredibly fidgety. I just can't sit still. It gives me anxiety. So things around meditation and stuff I find really hard. And I find with a lot of sports, especially like tennis and stuff, I'm really in the present. I'm really in that moment and can really feel just that presence where I'm not really thinking about the past. I probably am thinking about the future to an extent in terms of if I'm going to lose the match or not, but
Yeah.
primarily staying in the present.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite nice actually. And I can tell that you're quite confident in your abilities too, right? You've come a long way and you've trained yourself and you're confident in your abilities and you're confident in your sports. What are the kind of things that you battled in terms of preconceptions or people kind of maybe putting you down or telling you, do you really need to do these things?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's the present tense. Like there's things you have to battle preconceived notions all the time. And again, I'm sure for people watching this or hearing this right now, I'm sure they can think about preconceived notions that they have to challenge, because the world, is based on the quote unquote normal, where anyone who falls outside of that is, in some ways sometimes mislabeled or misjudged. And as a person who has a disability and a really visible disability, there's loads of preconceived notions. I don't even know where to start. It comes everything from education to work to independence is questioned by other people, and it's not always, malice or anything. It's just ignorance. It's just people not feeling comfortable to ask and just assuming that just because you can't see, you can't do a certain thing. And it gets really tiring sometimes when you constantly have to battle through that, when you constantly have to explain to people and show them in some ways what you can do. Can get really tiring, but it can be incredibly rewarding as well when you hear someone at the end coming out with a different attitude towards life and believing that you can do some of that.
Mm,
So yeah, just something that pretty much
yeah,
happens all the time.
yeah.
There was a second part to your question, which I've completely forgotten, so apologies. What was the second part to your question?
To be honest, I can't remember. Anyone listening to the podcast, maybe remind us. But so, what is probably, or if you could
Yeah.
pinpoint the biggest preconception you've had to battle, if you don't mind sharing?
Ooh, that's a really tough one. The biggest one, I don't know. Is it too cheeky to say? I think the biggest one is that people just think if you're blind, you can't live a normal life.
Yeah,
I mean, normal is subject to debate in terms of what that
yeah,
means, but I think that is probably the biggest one. And obviously, that manifests itself in so many different ways, right? When it comes to carrying out day-to-day activities, when it comes to work, when it comes to sports, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to having kids, when it comes to being able to go out, all of that stuff. People just think, oh my god, and like if you think about it from like a regular person's perspective, like a lot of the perception of our surroundings and of our world is through our sight. In fact, some, scientists even say 80% of our perception of the world is through sight. So if someone doesn't have that sense, yes, you can compensate through other senses to an extent, but not so much that it can make it 80%. So there are a lot of things which need to be done very differently. So yes, people obviously have the right to ask that question, but it's what really annoys me is just people making those assumptions and in some ways not having the courage to speak to someone and to ask them the question, because I find it so beautiful just speaking to someone who's different, someone who's had different challenges in life, because they can open your eyes to a different world and a different perspective which you were never aware of in some ways.
yeah, definitely. And I guess, like you mentioned, the whole social construct of normal.
Yeah,
Everyone's normal is very different.
exactly.
Your normal is different to my normal. My normal is
Exactly.
different to anyone else's.
Absolutely.
Even if, we might present as typical,
Yeah,
but our normals are different just
absolutely.
because of the way we've been brought up and the way we've seen life or like just experienced life in itself. So do you personally feel like you wake up every morning kind of proving yourself or fighting the preconceptions
Yes
or
and no.
assumptions?
Yes and no. I think it's one of those things where I wake up every morning and obviously know that the day will in some ways bring challenges with itself. It's not to say that I think about it negatively, but I'm aware of it. And it's, with everything from me trying to walk to the station, I know that someday the bins might just be in the wrong place and I'll bump into them because I'm not aware of them, or there's going to be someone who thinks it's a very smart idea to park their car on the pavement,
Yeah.
and then I won't be aware of that. Or
Don't
you
do that,
know
guys.
there's in the exactly, or in the summer when the trees are overgrown, there's definitely going to be something that will hit my face. So all of those challenges are things that I've got to be really mindful of, and like just make sure I'm incredibly focused. Or when it comes to meeting strangers, either on the tube or when I'm walking to work, for example, or if I'm walking to my sports, not necessarily trying to prove something to them, but at the same time, in some ways, and I'm sure people from a minority perspective here would probably feel like you often have to feel like you have to be an ambassador for the group that you're representing, because you don't want to give a negative impression, because people probably haven't met, let's say, many disabled people or many blind people. I'd be like, oh my god, oh, this person's this or that. So I wouldn't say it's always active, but it's probably at the back of your mind a lot of the times. And I think you just have to be really aware of the challenges and how you're going to overcome them, because they pretty much come every single day. And in many ways, they do make you more resilient and stronger, but they are there pretty much all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really inspiring to me to hear that, and to see like how you've become extremely successful regardless, of what other people may think, or of what society actually makes us believe. So that's really inspiring, and I guess it's really inspiring to all the listeners that maybe are suffering with their identity as either being someone with additional needs or disabled, or even parents or even
Yeah.
family members of individuals with, additional needs or disability. So that's really
I think it's
fantastic.
about the perspective at the end, right? Like, when it comes to thinking about, like, if you are different and if you are not part of the quote unquote normal, how can you turn that into your favor? Because if you think about someone like myself who is blind, there's a lot that I can learn from that, because daily challenges means you in some ways forced to become a lot more resilient, become in some ways a lot more adaptable, because you have to constantly think about how can I adapt. So I work in a bank, for example, now, and I've worked in 7 different teams so far, and
Wow.
they've never had anyone who's blind. And it just means I constantly have to think about how can I adapt and how can I evolve. It makes you a lot more adaptable. It forces you to be a lot more organized as well. And because I need to know exactly where things are in my house, I need to know exactly what I'm doing when, how I can get there. Because if I'm running late, I can't just walk faster, because I'm gonna probably bang my head into something. And I think it's
Definitely.
about trying to think, how can I use some of that to my advantage, and all those incredible skills that I have developed, all that perspective that I've gotten, how can I help educate other people? How can I provide value that will help, let's say, this organization or this person succeed? And I think it's really about thinking, how can you turn some of those obstacles into opportunities?
Yeah. Wow, that's really inspiring again. Um, so kind of just like moving on, what is your involvement with the community like? Because I can imagine an individual like you who's really inspiring, who's really kind of successful. You obviously, I've heard you speak with Amanati organization,
Mm,
advocating for disability and inclusion.
yeah.
Do you do other work in the community? Because I can imagine you being a figurehead for a lot of people.
Unfortunately not. It's Yeah, it's one of those things where I have done some work with with the community, and I'd love to do more. But the most of the work that I have done so far is primarily in kind of that disability and advocacy space, where it's about speaking, or it's about kind of raising awareness, or in some ways, trying to make our community more inclusive in some ways. But there's absolutely so much more that I can do that I'd love to. And like one of the things which I did a few years ago, which I'd love to go back to, is to volunteer with Host Hassan and the food drives, and just speak to other people about the really really brilliant work that they do.
Yeah.
So my interaction with the community here in the UK, obviously because I came here 6 years ago, started then, and it's been great in some ways because a lot of my friends, one of the first things I did when I came to study my master's here was to join the Ahlulbayt Society at my university, and that allowed me to meet some incredible friends that I'm still in touch with. And I just felt so comfortable being around them and attending some of our centers with them, because it can be really really daunting for anyone to go to a new setting where you don't know anyone, where you don't know where things are. So I was super grateful for that. I felt really comfortable. What I did find really hard in our communities, and I still do to an extent, is again just that ignorance, where if I'm not with someone, it's just really hard because people don't understand what to do. The amount of times I've gone to a mosque and people have just said, would you like a chair? And I understand it comes from a really good place, but I don't understand if I can't see why I can't bend down on the floor to do sujood. Like, that has absolutely no connection with me not being able to see. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
I've, for example, this Shah Ramadan, thought, okay, let's be a bit adventurous and let's go to one of the mosques. And I have to say, it was one of the scariest experiences I had, because people were so difficult in many ways, not even telling me, for example, which way the Qibla was. And I can understand people feel nervous, but we need to start having these conversations, because unless we try and make our mosques more inclusive from any perspective, right? If someone's not fitting to what you were saying, like the quote unquote norm, I feel a lot of our centers don't welcome them. They kind of make them feel ostracized. They make them feel, and I'm sure if there's any reverse listening to this, they can probably relate to this more than anyone else. And it's really sad because a lot of the reverts have made so much of an effort to become part of this community, want to integrate, but oftentimes we do alienate them because we tend to sit in our own little groups. We probably talk in a language which a lot of them can't understand. And God forbid, if they happen to have a disability, we'll just ignore them, because that's probably the easier approach to take than actually speak to them and see what we can do to help. And you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to know exactly what to do. All you need to do is to have the courage and ask them, how can I help you? How can I make you feel more welcome? So
Yeah.
after that experience that I had, I found it really hard. And just as an example, someone kept the food in front of me when it was iftar time and didn't say anything. So for 10 minutes or so, I had no idea that someone had done it, because obviously I couldn't see that it was in front of me. And it was a really simple thing for that person to say, or for someone else beside me to say, which no one else did either. And that experience really put me off, and I didn't really go for the rest of Shahar Ramadan on my own, because I'm like, it won't be such a good experience. And I've always kind of found great people to go with, like either friends or some volunteers in the mosque. So I just really hope that our centers will be more welcoming towards everyone, and try and make everyone feel included. And I'm sure I could do better in that space as well. I'm pretty sure I don't make everyone feel welcome, but we just all need to be aware of it and hopefully make the effort.
Yeah, definitely. You've actually touched on quite important points in terms of things that we don't recognize as simple things, like saying, by the way, there's food in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, what we say in Arabic, tfadhalu, like you
Yes.
can now eat.
Exactly.
These things, I don't know why in my head trying to think of, why do people not want to say something? Do they find it awkward? Are they nervous? Is there a factor of fear involved?
I think fear is a huge, and just nervousness.
Yeah.
I think we generally just are people who don't want to confront something that's different, and don't necessarily want to be, embarrassed or feel ashamed, or worse case scenario, don't want to be like offensive towards someone else. And now in the West and kind of around the world and generally, just this whole culture of being politically correct, I understand where it's coming from. We all want to be nice to each other and not want to offend, but it's reached a point where we'd rather not have a conversation with someone than actually ask those difficult questions, and sometimes get it wrong. And there is a way around it, because you can always caveat it by saying, I don't know if I'm doing it the right way, but forgive my ignorance, because most people will give you the benefit of the doubt, and it's about intention rather than just the action. So I think fear is a huge part of it, and I think we just need to get to grips with it and just tackle it and just have a conversation, because once you pass that initial chasm, it does become a lot easier. And I find that not just in our communities, in lots of different aspects. To give you an example, the amount of times I've been on the London Underground, because obviously I can't drive, so I mainly use public transport to get around. if I'm going to work where I don't need any assistance because I know exactly what the route is, where's the platform, where to jump on, I'll almost 90% of the times not get a seat on the way because people probably will go like, I don't want to get up, I don't want to give up my seat. And obviously I can't see them. But I can show you the amount of times I've been with a sighted friend, jumped on the train, and immediately someone will get up because they can see that someone else can see them.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't know, maybe they don't want to get up because they just feel like they don't want to get up and just keep that seat, or they probably feel like, what should I say to this person? Because I have had a couple of times where someone's gotten up and not said a word, and someone else from along the carriage has said someone's giving you a seat, and it's like, well, that's really helpful of the person to stand up, but if they actually haven't said anything, it's kind
Yeah.
of commonsensical. If I can't see them, how am I supposed to know if they've gotten up? Or
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm going to work, I go through a shopping center. Someone's held open the door for me, and I go through another door, and some of them get offended. It's like, you haven't said anything once you've held the door open. How am I supposed to know? And I think
Yeah.
some of those things sound really commonsensical, but they're really not, because people tend to make those mistakes all the time, and it really annoys me. And I think just that nervousness, just that lack of awareness of what to do. And I think that's why I'm a huge believer of just having those dialogues and just having those uncomfortable conversations, because that will hopefully make people more aware and then know next time what to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this show.
Yeah,
We wanted to have those conversations so people kind of feel okay to listen, and people to feel like, oh, actually, that makes so much sense. That's his perspective. I've never
Exactly.
heard that perspective before. So alhamdulillah, that's why I'm extremely happy for you to be here on the show with us.
You guys are doing a brilliant job with all
Yeah.
the presenters so far. It's been fantastic to to hear from the different guests.
Alhamdulillah. So you kind of touched on the fact that there's a fear of unknown.
Yeah.
And there's also a fear of trying to be politically correct.
Yep.
So everyone is trying to be, I'm trying to be politically, everyone is trying to be politically correct. That's like one of the things you don't want to get wrong in life.
Exactly.
Because obviously you don't want to offend anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, sometimes, like we discussed this earlier before the show, about the thread that I saw on Twitter, and how
Yes.
there was this one guy. Twitter is a scary place to be sometimes.
It is.
But
I'm
there
luckily
was,
not on it. So.
you know, so there was a guy, I don't know, I didn't even follow him, but he tweeted something, and on the comment section, people were going off on one about whether or not they agreed with his terminology. And I just thought, wow, that's very interesting, because so many people have different opinions, and they might find offence to certain things that I didn't really know why they found offence to. And that's the whole purpose of being politically correct. So what's your opinion about terminology and labelling, essentially?
Yeah, so on your point of political correctness, first, right, as we kind of all agree, we need to try and not be offensive to anyone and use the right terminology, but we're not always going to get it right. And just avoiding that conversation isn't the answer. It's not going to take you very far. And to your point around terminology, many people will get it wrong regardless. And I had a really interesting show on the radio a few months ago around terminology, where even people in the visually impaired community, which is obviously a very small minority compared to the world's population, even they couldn't agree on what's the correct terminology.
Yeah.
Some people get offended if you say the word blind. Other people will be like, no, visually impaired is not the correct term, it's sight impaired. Others might say, no, it's partially sighted, etc. So even we as a little group can't agree what the correct terminology is, because something will offend someone. And, you know, it's about trying to be sensible. It's about having that good intention. And if you get it wrong, just apologize. Because I personally don't mind being referred to as blind, because that's what I am. But at the same time, some people will find it offensive, and that's fine. So that's the first thing. Like, let's not always avoid having those conversations just because you want to offend people, because you will offend them regardless, whether you have it or you don't. Around terminology, again, people find it uncomfortable, for example, to say, and I have to say, you've been great at that. I'm not sure if it's because of training or if it's just common sense. You're just a smart girl. But like, you know, you, for example, said, nice to see you. Or, for example, have you read my message? And that kind of stuff is perfectly okay to say. I don't know why people think that if they say, Naqi, have you heard that match?
Yeah.
It's like, you're automatically making me more aware of my disability by changing the way you speak to me. You know, just because you're speaking to, let's say, a friend of yours on the phone just because you can't see them doesn't mean you speak to them differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the key message, So it's perfectly fine to say to someone who's visually impaired, like, did you see the match yesterday, or have you read this book, or what did you write in your exam? Because those kind of things are things that you would use day to day, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to make the other person feel a lot more conscious.
Yeah.
Obviously, there might be a very small minority of people that might get offended, and that might be because they might be losing their sight, which can obviously be a huge grieving process. But that's not to indicate that you've done anything wrong. You just apologize and just move on. But generally, those kind of things are perfectly appropriate to say. And, I often tell people when I meet them, lovely to see you. And that's deliberately to kind of make that point. It's fine to say stuff like that.
Yeah. It's nice to see that you make other people feel comfortable too, and essentially, moral of the story is just ask,
Absolutely.
or just speak normally, and just if someone gets offended, then you can change
Exactly.
the way you say it or the terminology, and I think that's a really nice approach, because sometimes it's better just to say something than not to say anything at all, or to
Exactly.
ask a question than not to ask at all.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes we live in our own ignorance, which is obviously not the best. And just having those conversations, it obviously doesn't bother you that much, but it makes quite a big impact on our lives, because moving forward with whoever we interact with, we'll know what's right and what's not right. In terms of like your relationship with community, we've addressed, but can we tap into your relationship with religion?
Absolutely.
So, has Islam helped you cope, or what is the role of Islam in your life?
Enormously. And Islam's been an, very important part of my life since I was born, because my parents, alhamdulillah, have a very, very special connection with God. And I'm sure, you know, my sister and I, and the challenges that we faced, which my parents completely didn't expect, because as I said, no one else in our family ever had the condition, just strengthened their faith in Allah even further, because they just knew this was a test from God. And it was really hurtful. And I can remember some of this myself from my parents, I'm sure, to hear stuff like, oh, you must have committed a really bad sin for your kids to have this condition.
Oh, wow.
And you hear that in the community a lot, right? I'm sure in both Muslim and non-Muslim communities, where people just think, oh, this is a curse and this is just because of something bad you did. So I'm sure that made my parents, very strong in some ways. But growing up, just, like salah or fasting and haram, all of that was just a part of me and just a part of my upbringing. But I remember this time when I was kind of 9 and very enthusiastic to pray and fast, and I used to do that with my dad, and I absolutely loved it. And then there came a time, probably my early teens, when I completely stopped praying and reached a point where I was like, I'm not sure. I think life's too hard. I don't think there's much in it for me. And I guess what a lot of parents who want their kids to pray and stuff would probably take an approach where they would either force their kids to pray and kind of make sure that they do it, and even, for some instances, beat them up. And yeah, that might help in a certain way, but that will probably instill some sort of a fear where they might pray in front of you, not when you, and not pray when you're not around, but also might not have that connection.
Yeah.
My parents never did that, and I still remember pretty much every single evening when my mom and I used to go for a walk, she used to talk to me about stories about how, her faith in Allah really helped her cope in some very, very challenging times, and how Salah in some ways was that boat that saved her, and kind of kept passing those messages on to me. And I took them in, and it didn't probably have an impact for a while, but I remember on my 15th birthday is when it really struck, and I was like, I think I need to start praying. And it's one of those things now where she instilled it so deeply in me, alhamdulillah. There's not been a single day, where I haven't prayed now, whether she's
Alhamdulillah.
around or not. And
Yeah.
it's that thing where she never forced me to do it. They never said, oh, you have to do this, otherwise we won't be happy with you, we're going to beat you up, etc. They kind of instilled that love of God. And I think oftentimes, and Sheikh Jawad Shamali in particular, who's someone I really look up to, he articulates this so beautifully. I grew up, even in our schools and stuff, just hearing about God as this being who'll just put you in hellfire if you don't do things right. But there was never this thing around compassion and love and how merciful he is. Yeah, we talk about like Rahman and Rahim as words, but not really the manifestation of that
Yeah.
in many ways. And I think it's so important to kind of make sure that the people around us, our kids and stuff, love God and love Islam. And I can't say that I'm necessarily the most practicing or the best Muslim, but I have this really special connection with God where He is part of my life every single day in kind of the different things I do. And it's about trying to you know, use that to your advantage. I like the amount of strength I get from knowing that even if there's no one with me, Allah is always there. And there have been some really trying times because I've lived away from my family for about 10 years now, so kind of since I went to university. And it's been really hard just living on my own in many instances. I've had a fair few injuries where my parents have been really paranoid. I've had 2 fractures in the last year. I had COVID
Oh,
twice, and my parents were like, oh my God. And
wow.
I was like, how am I gonna cope? But just to know that Allah is there, alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah,
it's
yeah.
it's all kind of worked out. And it's for me it's about knowing that God's delays are not his denials. Just because we ask for something and we don't get it doesn't mean that God's not listening to us. And when I was younger, I sometimes used to think to myself, and I'm sure everyone does, why am I in this situation? All of my friends can have fun. They can do things a certain way. Why has Allah put me in this situation that I have to struggle and suffer so much all the time? And I want this back, and it never happened. I never got my sight back. But now reflecting on it, I couldn't be more grateful for it because I think it helped shape the person I am. It allowed me to experience life in a different way. And you know what? Honestly, if I was just like everyone else, if I could just see, I probably wouldn't meet the most incredible people in my life that I've met. I probably wouldn't be here and wouldn't be talking to a lot of people and hopefully helping them see life in a slightly different way. And I think it's a huge blessing. And we need to think about whatever Allah does, as long as we're doing it with the right intention, whatever the outcome is, if you've given it your best, that's what you should be content with. And I know it's easier said than done, but that's something I try and have at the back of my mind. If Allah has put me through this, He's the one who will hold my hand and make sure that I can get through this as well. And when we think about the event of Karbala and stuff, when you probably think that on the face of it, if you just make someone who has no idea about the context, look at the numbers. Imam Hussein's army lost really badly because they were all martyred, whereas the opposition won. But 1400 years on, whose name do we remember, and whose story kind of lives on, and whose message lives on, and it's obviously Imam Hussein and stuff, because that victory isn't just what you see at face value.
Yeah,
And things in life, things in religion are a lot deeper than that. But I think sometimes, particularly now in this materialistic world where it's all about commodities, where it's all about superficial stuff, we tend to just look at things at face value and define success in a certain way. And if you have so much money, you're going to be successful. And if you don't, and we've really become myopic in terms of what our views are. And I think religion really helps think, make you think slightly differently and appreciate life in a really different way.
definitely. Definitely. Wow. That's one of the most nicest and the most inspirational perspectives I've heard, to do with someone with having Islam as your identity, and seeing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our Lord, is our backbone, and
Absolutely.
and that He is always there. And some
100%.
people, there's different tafsir to the hadith that says Allah is closer to us than our jugular vein.
Yeah.
But from what you were saying to me, it popped up in my head. I was thinking, yeah, Allah is so close to us to the point that He is supporting us and He's our backbone and He's pushing us. And then in your case, He's there for you,
Always.
in the way that you want Him to be there. And subhanallah, we all of our everyone's relationship with God is so different.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of to do with the result of our experiences, and it's the conditions of the life that we live.
Yes.
And like you said, that maybe if you could see, if you weren't visually impaired, you would have had a different relationship with God. And so, subhanallah, Allah brings His servants to Him in different ways, in the way that He wants to.
And actually, one of the hadiths which really struck a chord with me, I heard it a few years ago, because I know lots of people ask the question why me? And I used to think is this a punishment from God or a test? And I think it was by Imam Ali, and I can't quote, so I'm just paraphrasing, that if something brings you closer to Allah, it's a test. If it takes you away, it's a punishment. And I think a lot of the times we'll see that our challenges, bring us closer to Allah and make us reflect and kind of give us the opportunity to change something in us or in others. And we need to look at it as a blessing. And in the moment it feels really hard, and as I said, like, I've come to terms many years ago with my blindness and stuff, but it doesn't mean it's not a challenge. It's a challenge every single day, but it's about appreciating that and just doing the best that you can with it, because you can't change in many instances what the cards you dealt with, but how you play them is what you can change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's one of those things that everyone suffers kind of alone in terms of just
Yeah.
thinking or evaluation of why has certain things happened.
Yeah.
And in Arabic we say hikmah, like there's wisdom behind
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's just trying to tap into that and trying to understand that God loves me so much that he's doing something that he wants me to come closer.
Exactly.
Definitely. So it's been a very, very, very nice conversation with you, with yourself. We've learned
Likewise,
so
thank
many
you.
things. I'm going to leave this conversation extremely inspired, first and foremost, and having learned a lot of things in terms of like how to deal, how to talk, and even in terms of relationship with God. I think, like you said, Sheikh Shamali talks a lot of the things that we spoke about as well. And so it's been a really nice time conversing with you and yourself.
I've enjoyed it. I can't believe how quickly it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone so quickly. I wish we had more time to like talk about other points, but alhamdulillah. I hope all the listeners and the viewers have enjoyed and have listened and have learnt something and can go home and take one of the little nuggets of advice that Brother Naqi has given us, and inshallah we can change the world for the better,
Inshallah.
by one conversation at a time,
we
inshallah.
all need to do it as a collective and as a community, guys, and let's pray for each other, and let's try and be humble, and let's not think we have all the answers, because we all need to work together to do this, and inshallah we all can.
Inshallah. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Brother Naqi, for coming
Thank
onto
you
the
for
show.
having me.
And inshallah we'll see you next week with another episode of Out of Sight. مع السلامة.